So Bobby doesn't probably need an introduction, specifically here. Yeah, he and I both work at least part of the time at Pace University, right around the corner. Wow. So I'm going to ask a few questions up here. I think we'll have some questions from the audience, I presume. I don't know if anyone's tweeting. I didn't set up a hashtag for this, but could do that. My first question actually is for the audience. And I'm not going to expect that this movie necessarily changed any views out there, but did anyone feel a wedge open onto a new way of thinking about this, different than what you came into the room with? That's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting. That's newsworthy. So now, my first question for you is, I mean, if I had to summarize the movement that Michael Schellenberger essentially closes the piece with, the idea of movement, if you had to have a bumper sticker for that movement, it would be some nukes. It wouldn't be no nukes. And it wouldn't
better nukes. I mean,
well, yeah, but how do you build a movement around a word like some, or even better? You know, this is an argument that's been cast so long as a yes or no thing. So
right.
Could you just dig in on that?
I can only tell you, I've been taking this film around the country for the last couple months. I've been taking it to colleges and universities. I'm going to move my chair so I can face you guys. Colleges, universities, different screenings for different groups. And one of the most heartening things about this, I was worried when I made this film that it would be very contentious and there'd be a lot of, you know, squabbling and fighting. And it's actually really brought people together. Like in the universities I've taken it to, we've had climate, environmental studies students and engineering students coming, meeting, talking for the first time. We've had, you know, Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals coming to see a movie together and engaging in a conversation about climate change. And it hasn't been contentious for the most part. So I think there's a solid middle out there that recognizes that climate change is a deadly serious problem that is only getting worse. And that the things that we environmentalists have tried to do over the last 25 years in trying to reduce the overall amount of energy through energy efficiency, putting a lot of our eggs in the basket of wind and solar to replace fossil fuels, and trying to get a price on carbon through international agreements. All great things that I fully support, but they have not worked completely, and CO2 emissions are continuing to rise. 400 parts per million, as was announced, you know, highest in all of human history. So, and the climate scientists you talk to say, you know, we've only got a few decades to really solve this. So what we do now, our generation, the things that we decide on right now, are going to make a huge difference going forward. It's going to make, it's make or break, I think, for everything. So I made this film to expand this conversation. I think to take out of the equation one of the most remarkable non-CO2 emitting unscalable non-CO2 emitting sources of energy at the very moment when we need to dramatically reduce CO2 emissions is well, Jim Hansen says it's, you know, horribly irresponsible. Those are his words, and I would say I would go stronger than that.
So Bobby, I got to just ask for your review. If you were Siskel or Ebert, what would you say?
I've talked to Robert about the film before, and I saw an earlier iteration of it, and I thought that this one was a little bit more convincing, but a little bit more dishonest as well. I would say, if I had to characterize the film, I would say it's an elaborate hoax. Almost every fact in it that's presented as facts is untrue or misleading. I want to say this about my own attitude towards nuclear, which is that I'm all for it if they can ever make it safe and if they can ever make it economical. And so far, it's neither. And this isn't, you know, a bunch of hippies saying that, let me do safe first. It's not just a bunch of hippies who are saying that nuclear energy is unsafe. It's the insurance industry. In this country, a nuclear power plant cannot get insurance because the people on Wall Street have carefully assessed it and said, you are too expensive, you are too risky to insure. So the industry had to go to Congress and get an act passed called the Price-Anderson Act, which exempts them from the risk of running a nuclear power plant. It's the only industry in this country that is exempt from risks of accidents at its own facilities. So every homeowner's insurance policy in this country has a provision in it, and you can go home and look at your own, that says that this policy does not insure you against, does not protect you against radiation damage to your property caused by an accident or a release of radiation from a nuclear power plant. Again, I think if the industry can make itself safe and they can get insurance, I would look differently at it. And I'm not presenting myself as an expert on nuclear power, but I know enough about it just from fighting Indian Point to know that many of the things that were said in this film were just, they were, first of all, industry propaganda. The whole premise of the film, that these are leading nuclear activists, is untrue. I don't know, I mean, I know most of the leading nuclear activists, and I know that 2 of them are actually nuclear industry people, 2 of the principal speakers. I think 5 of them are associated, well, Ted Sills and the other guy who was with Argonne. What's his? Huh? The guys who are with Argonne.
The engineers.
Yeah, the engineers.
Well, of course, yeah.
Right.
Right.
So they're not environmentalists, and they were not ever anti-nuclear activists. I think 4 or 5 of the people are associated with the Breakthrough Institute, which is an anti-environmental think tank in Washington, D.C. that works in partnership with the American Enterprise Institute. Oh. Ted Nordhaus and Michael Schellenberg.
Wait.
Let me just finish saying this. So here's the other, I said safe. The other thing that they'd have to show me is that they're economical. The last nuclear power plant constructed in the world was in Finland. It cost about $11 billion a gigawatt. Now, I'm involved with the construction right now of one of the largest power plants in North America, which is in the Mojave Desert, and it's a solar thermal plant, and it's costing about $3 billion a gigawatt. Not only do you have to, and there's nobody, by the way, there's no individual and there's no utility, merchant utility, that will build a nuclear power plant because they're so expensive. You can't make money on them. The only ones that will build them are regulated utilities like the Southern Company in Georgia and North Carolina, because they make money by spending money. They get reimbursed for their capital costs plus 12 or 15% profits per year. So they'll construct it because once they get approval from the Public Utility Commission, for them, they want to spend as much money on their capital costs as possible so that you and I have to pay for it. But we're paying for it. You know, I don't think Bill Gates, or I saw Paul Allen as one of the funders of the film, that they're going to spend their own money building one of these plants. So, you know, you could make energy cost, to build a solar plant costs about $3 billion a gigawatt. To build a wind plant costs about $3 billion a gigawatt. A coal plant, the same, or an oil plant. So you could make energy by burning prime rib. But, you know, why would you take the most expensive way to do it? The other, you know, the other big flaw, other than these people are not environmentalists, the other kind of big lie.
Do you include Stuart Brand in that?
Well, let me just finish. The other big lie in this film.
Wait.
Do you include Stuart Brand in your list of people who are not really environmentalists?
I don't know. Stuart Brand was the guy who started the Whole Earth Catalog?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think Stuart Brand started the Whole Earth Catalog 40 years ago. But right now, he runs a think tank in which the members of the think tank are Bechtel and General Electric and funders and Siemens and Vestas and, you know, nuclear power industry. And I think he's very fascinated.
You're invested in solar, and you have your own investments.
Well, yeah,
so why should we trust you any more than them if you're going to take it to that level?
But what are you saying about my investments?
No, literally. If you're, you know, through, was it Kleiner Perkins or whatever it is, And you know, when I hear
His
you,
vantage point. Yes.
right. So what's the deal? I mean, why should I listen to you any more than I would listen to them if it's all about money?
I'm fully disclosing my financial interest in solar. My advocacy preceded that, and the reason that I got involved in producing energy is because I had shills for the nuclear power industry and the coal and oil industry for many years saying, oh, Bobby Kennedy, he doesn't like any kind of energy. He wants us to eat cold food in it by candlelight. So, you know, I got into the industry to show that there was an alternative and that the alternative was economically viable, and not only that, on a level playing field, if we weren't giving them the subsidies to these incumbents, our technologies would beat them hands down. They simply couldn't compete. That's what I was going to say. One of the many other big lies of this film is that solar and wind are kind of marginalized technologies. These are bankable technologies. They're technologies that are, last year and the year before, we built more solar and more wind in this country than we did all of the incumbents combined. So, and we can beat them, we can tie them on construction costs, and after you build a wind plant or a solar plant, it's free energy forever.
Can I say something?
Because the photons are hitting the earth for free. Once you build his, well, then you got to store this stuff for 30,000 years.
Robert does need some when words like lies are thrown
Well,
around.
yeah,
Wait.
This propaganda for the last hour.
Come on.
I'd
wait a second.
like
Just wait a
5
second.
minutes to respond.
Look,
Okay,
Bobby.
good enough.
I mean, there's people here who are actually believing this stuff, and it's
Bobby.
just not true.
Bobby, I came here to have a discussion, and I'll have a discussion about solar. I'm all for solar. If you can do solar cheaper, if we could power the entire world with algae, that'd be fine with me.
Well, we can do solar cheaper.
No, that's great. I think that's
So let's
fantastic.
do it instead of wasting our time with this stuff.
Well, what
I
I'd
think
like
we
to
need
do,
everything. That's all.
let's-
But when you tell me that I'm
let's
a
hit the pause
liar,
bu- let's hit the pause
or
button.
I'm in the, why would I lie? What is it about me or any of the people in my film that makes us liars? Why would we lie?
Okay, I'm
'Cause
not.
that's a strong word. I would never.
Well, first of all, I
call
didn't
you
call you a liar.
You
Robert.
did. You said my film is a
I think
hoax.
this is a hoax.
A
And I
hoax.
think you know why.
So then I'm a
okay,
liar.
I mean, let me give you. Okay,
Right?
well, that's your characterization.
But you don't want to call me a liar. You didn't call me a liar.
I didn't call you a liar.
You like me.
I'm too. Yeah,
I'm a nice
That's
guy.
a little Clinton-esque.
Fellow environmentalist.
But I will call Schellenberger and Ted Nordhaus liars.
Ted Nordhaus isn't in the film. But
Yeah, he is in
Mark,
the film.
Mark Linus. He
That's
said
not
Mark
true.
Linus is not an
He is in the film.
environmentalist. He's not an environmentalist. This guy
he's
has
a reporter.
dedicated his entire life to writing books about climate change. He was, I mean, this guy.
Is he the British reporter?
You don't even know who he is, and you're telling me he's. You don't even know who he is. You don't even know who he is, and you said he's not an environmentalist.
I said I'm not an expert in this. I
He
know
wrote the book
something about
Six.
the
He
people
wrote the
who are
book
in
6
it.
Degrees, which is, to my
Right,
money,
and he-
one of the best books ever written about the climate crisis.
Right, and I think that I haven't
Among
read
many
the
other
book.
things.
I haven't read the book, but I believe he's also one of the big champions for GMO foods and for genetic engineering.
But
And
we're
I think he has a
talking-
fascination for technology and for also. You asked me why.
He's a big champion of science, actually.
Would be okay.
But what are we talking about here? Because we can have
Yeah.
we can talk about when I and Bobby, we had a discussion, like we met at, we're mutual friends. My producer Jim Swartz is a mutual friend. We met at his house a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And we had a spirited discussion, but at that point, I remember you telling me, it's like, you don't really have a problem with nuclear, it's just about cost.
No,
That
it's
was the big
cost and
issue.
safety. But
But
now
you're
I have
calling
a
me
problem with
you're
you
calling me a
personally
liar.
because you put me in
I'm
your
not-
film.
I mean, why would
since
I?
then.
Why, okay, explain to me why. Explain to me. No, Bobby, I love you dearly.
That was-
but
that
please,
was a lie.
Explain to me. Okay, but Jim Hansen, who's a climate scientist I think you respect, basically says exactly the same thing that's in the film, as do a host of other people. I mean, are we all liars? Are we all dupes of the nuclear industry?
No,
Are we
and
all
of
in
course-
part of some big conspiracy? I mean, why are we liars? Why would I lie?
Don't try to marginalize me by saying I'm saying about everybody who's pro-nuke that they're a liar. There's a lot of people who are pro-nuke who are honest about it and honest
And
about.
I'm dishonest about it.
Well, this film is dishonest.
Well, tell me.
Well, I mean, I can tell you the clip that you put in about that had me in it is is completely out of context because
Well,
what I was saying.
I urge all of you to go online, it's on YouTube, and see the whole context.
Right. And the context is this, that what I was talking about is the failure, is the lack of a grid system in this country.
Right.
We don't have a unified national grid that makes it possible, and I'm trying to help build one.
That's absolutely true.
Okay, that makes it possible for us to hook up these new currents of power. If we did, we can replace, we can build solar plants and wind plants in 1 or 2 years.
I'm not disputing that. I don't dispute.
So, and what I was saying is, at this point, let me just finish saying what I was saying.
Okay.
At this point, the only way that we can build wind and solar is if you put them. If somebody needs a 24-hour load, you need to put them next to a natural gas pipe. But once we build a national grid, we don't have to do that because the wind in this country blows at night and the solar, everybody knows this, shines during the day. So, and those two will balance each other out, but you can't do that without
if we rebuild the entire electrical grid of the United States. Yeah.
Well, we're doing that piece by piece already.
Okay.
Pretty darn slowly.
And I'll tell you what, it's a lot cheaper. We could rebuild the national grid for twice what we've spent on this technology. We have $100 billion that we've built these breeder reactors. I mean, this is not a new technology. It was one of the first technologies they discussed. We've spent $100 billion building them. Half of them failed. There were fires at 95% of them, and all of them are now offline because they don't work, and because of the danger of proliferation.
Just a second here. Are you saying that we should never we should cancel all nuclear research? We should never research it. We should not, like if a experimental reactor has a problem, we should just abandon the technology altogether.
No, I'm not.
Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I think it's fine to do.
Because there's incredibly exciting things going on. You talked about, Bill Gates or Paul Allen should go invest. Bill Gates actually is building a reactor. It's called the traveling wave reactor.
I think that's great.
There's
a lot of interest. He's doing it with his own money.
Just say something, please. There's a lot of interesting things going on in nuclear energy. The technological revolution that has changed all of our lives in the last 20, 30 years has also impacted nuclear technology. It's come a long way. There's thorium reactors look really promising. Small modular reactors that just got approved by the Obama administration. I guess President Obama's a liar too. I mean, Obama and his entire administration is very interested in nuclear energy to solve the climate crisis. There's all kinds of things. Small modular reactors probably, I think they're very exciting because they can be built in a factory like we build jet aircraft, commercial aircraft, modular design, mass production, get economies of scale, and roll them out at a price point that private companies can invest in. And where you have $1 billion for like a 150 megawatt nuclear plant, rather than these gargantuan things that we're left with like Indian Point. I agree with you on that, but look,
wait, just one second. I wish
I can go home now.
Just wait 1 second. Just wait 1 second. I think we need everything, and I go back to the final point. What is the goal? Is the goal more solar and more wind? Is that the primary objective, or is the objective to leave a better and healthier planet for our children and our grandchildren by dramatically cutting CO2 emissions right now, today? Right, because everything is going the wrong direction. You talk about wind and solar, it's all like the fastest growing. The fastest growing source of energy right now in the planet is coal. Its use is it's the most widely used source of energy, and its use is accelerating. And CO2 emissions are going up too. Germany, which you hold up as a great example of renewable energy technology, it's great what they're doing. I applaud what they're doing, but they're also shutting down all their nuclear plants, and their CO2 emissions are going up.
And
they're building
coal from the United States.
They just built the biggest coal plant. Their coal plant they just brought online is the single biggest point of CO2 emissions in all of the European Union. And I don't see your German Greens protesting that. You made a documentary about coal. It was great. Why aren't you against? You should be spending your energies attacking the coal plant, not me. Attacking the gas industry, not me. I am your friend. I'm an environmentalist. I am on your side.
Okay. Well, number one.
And the oil and gas industry are looking at this debate and laughing all the way to the bank, I have to say.
I am spending my time fighting the coal industry and fighting the gas industry.
You're also
That's
fighting me.
Well, yeah, because you brought this to my hometown and you put me in your show. And
is that what you're mad about?
Well, it's also.
Honestly, is that what you're mad about? No, I'm sorry.
Let me say that there's a lot of debating tricks that you use and that you use in this film that are dishonest. And one is to mischaracterize my argument and then argue with the mischaracterization.
No, but you just said it was true, that if you build these plants, you have to put them near a gas
Let me
plant.
answer
Okay.
what you said.
All right. Let's not get angry.
Let me
at each
answer
other,
what
though.
you said.
Let's
I'm
not
not
get
angry. I have 11 brothers and sisters. This is all we do.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. I only have one sister, so.
You know, this is what I told you the first time.
Right.
You asked me about all
You're
these.
getting your money's worth, aren't you?
Absolutely.
You asked me about, am I against nuke? Am I against research? Am I against these new technologies? And I said this to you when I first saw your film. I wish you had done a film about the new technologies. You know, give me something to get excited about. What you did in this film is you were telling things that weren't true about an old technology that we know is not a good technology.
But that's not true. That
Actually,
is not
let
true.
me, as
Let me
the
tell you why it's not a good technology.
General election.
theoretically, as the moderator, I want to just, I want to introduce a thought. I mean, most of your arguments you've addressed so far are economic. I think the film did a good job.
Proliferation is one that I have not yet addressed.
Yeah, but let's talk about the realities of epidemiology and what we know and don't know about health impacts of nuclear power that exists. In other words, a big chunk of the film was trying to demystify cancer, radiation, and what we know and don't know about what's happened with health impacts of these disasters that have occurred. And is there anything in there that you would say is not true? Because I've reported on the WHO and the UNSCAEAR reports on Fukushima and what's going forward there. That, you know, so tell me what's the lie there.
Okay, let me tell you the truth. Okay, there's a range of estimates, and this is a good example of the way that this film deceives. There are a range of estimates about how many people were killed as the result of the accident at Chernobyl, and not killed immediately, but how many excess cancers will or have occurred because of that accident. They range from a Russian study, which Helen Caldicott apparently was quoting, which says that the number is 958,000.
That study's been discredited. I can email me, revkin@gmail, if you want to find out about it.
Right. I'm telling you what the range is, and then I'm going to tell you what I think are the best guesses. Okay? The range is from 958,000, which is a flawed study, but it is a study that's out there. The other range is that only a few hundred, like they say in this film, died, which is also flawed and has very little basis in reality. The best numbers come from multiplying the exposures to what they call man-sieverts to the number of people who were exposed. And those estimates come from the National Academy of Science. And they estimate...
They do not come from the National Academy of Sciences.
Yeah, they come from I'm telling you the exposure rates, how many people will die from, or how many people will contract cancer from how much exposure to REMS or sieverts. That comes, the National Academy of Science has done that. They have not done an estimate on Chernobyl.
Thank you.
But their formulas have been used along with UN formulas.
So what you're saying is there's this discredited study that says almost 1 million people died, and the World Health Organization, the United Nations Commission, this is a study of the effects of atomic radiation, about half a dozen other United Nations agencies, plus the government of Russia, plus the government of Ukraine, plus the government of Belarus, plus every reputable scientist around the world that accepts this study says 56 people died with a projected, using the linear non-threshold theory that you're referring to, projected out will be eventually, over the course of a lifetime, 4,000 people may die, which is in the film. Now you're saying that, well, that you're leaving the audience to believe, well, the number must be somewhere in between.
You're mischaracterizing my argument and then responding to your mischaracterization. If you let me finish what I'm saying.
How do we know what we know? I'm not saying
Well, you're
these
saying
numbers.
the World Health Organization.
Yes.
You spent a lot of time in film.
You have to have a baseline of who you believe about climate change, about
I would
the
not
Earth
believe-
revolving around the
Right,
sun,
and
about
I would
evolution, or
I would
anything.
not believe the World Health Organization.
Okay.
Because of its strong relationship. It is what we call a captive agency. Because
But
of the
I'll bet
international.
you-
Who do you believe?
wait,
Do you
wait.
believe the IPCC?
Wait, no, hold on.
I
No,
believe
just let's stick with the WHO. WHO, maybe we shouldn't believe them, because a few years ago they said 150,000 people a year were already dying of global warming, and that was actually not correct either. That was an overestimate. So basically,
I'm not going to speak about what the WHO says on other issues. I'm sure there's lots of different scientists there. What I'm saying is that they are not a credible source when it comes to estimating risks from nuclear energy because of their
So who is?
well-known relationship
What?
with the International Atomic Energy Commission, which is one of the greatest promoters of nuclear
Nuclear
energy
power.
on the planet. So
Also
that's
the
all I'm
biggest
saying.
Yeah.
nuclear watchdog.
well, I want to introduce there's so much passion around these issues, and there's so many feelings. There's a guy named Paul.
Let me just say what I think the best estimates are. And again,
Yeah.
there are many credible scientists and scientific institutions have made this. That 40,000 people will get cancer, 20,000 of them will die. There's also other estimates that say 17 to 68,000, but I think the best estimates are in that range, not 4,000. And
Well,
I'm happy to show you the report.
This gets to
What
one
does it
aspect.
afterwards again?
Hold on. This gets to one aspect of this issue that makes it. There are irreconcilable differences around issues like this, and fracking is another one. Where, if you're in Fukushima, think back to that scene when Mark Linus, who's one of the most passionate and informed journalists looking at these questions, who was supportive of nuclear power, and he's pretty darn freaked out. What did he say? I'm wobbling, and he never actually. He kind of says in the end he's not wobbling, but. There's a guy named Paul Slovic who years ago wrote a book called Feeling of Risk. He's a psychologist, risk specialist, a behavioral guy at Oregon State. He wrote a book called The Feeling of Risk, in which the core idea is that most of us perceive information based on filters where your reaction is before the actual data. So the data comes second, your reaction is first. And when I see powerful and informed reactions to events or risk arguments, I see this pattern over and over again, whether it's in Marcellus Shale country or around nuclear power. And I think one thing that has to happen is to step back and focus on specific questions. One way forward, I think, is to try to delineate, well, we have different feelings about this information, and we know that there are, whether industry is bad or good as a whole, you saw those questions explored in the film. My wife and I have different views on Indian Point. We live in the same house, happily, but she doesn't want it relicensed, and I think keeping it running responsibly is a better choice for me. So I don't think you're ever going to see resolution here, but I think there are questions to ask. One of which is we should split this into existing nuclear and future nuclear. What we're going to build next, and what we've already built, and what we're saddled with. And let's just focus on the next stuff. You said you wish you had made the film on the next generation of technology. A certain chunk of the film is on that, probably a third, maybe 25%.
Not so much. I mean, the next generation technology is what's so exciting. It's what excited me about it. It's what turned Jim Hansen around. What turned Mark Linus around. So it was the idea that we know already how to make reactors that are fueled by the existing supply of nuclear waste. That football field of nuclear waste that's accumulated in the United States is enough to power everything in the United States, including transportation, everything, for 1,000 years. So we know how to make these kind of reactors. We know how to make them in a modular design where they can be mass-produced. We know how to make reactors where the physics of them are such that they can't melt down, suffer this kind of meltdown.
So, Bobby, actually, I was going to ask you, if you were John...
Look, this is the most thoroughly fact-checked and thoroughly vetted and thoroughly gone over documentary probably in history. I mean, it has been picked apart by everybody for the last 6 months.
And it will be again going forward.
But to say that it's just totally not true, and I've duped everyone, it just begs belief.
Did Clinton, Gore, Kerry et al. Screw up when they turned off the fast breeder program, 94?
No. And the reason, there are many reasons that fast breeders, and this is the other thing, to characterize fast breeders as a new technology, that's what I would have liked to see. I would like to see really a new technology. The thing about the football field is a deception, and I can explain why. But here's the answer to your question. The I told you the Finnish reactor is costing $11 billion a gigawatt. This technology is 1.5 to 2 times as expensive as that. Okay, breeder technology is much more expensive. It's also less reliable. It also has it's sodium cooled. Sodium is reactive, violently reactive, both to water and to air. We know what it does, and we know that when they built them, it was a waste of money. That the one that they built, the Super Phoenix, which is the most famous one that they built in France, gave 7% of the energy that it was expected to, and had to close after 15 years. The Manju plant that they built in Japan, which was the flagship of this kind of technology, had a fire in it and had to close down. The Kalkar plant, which was the flagship of the German breeder reactor effort, they never put plutonium in it, and it was used as an amusement park, and it is the only one of these plants to ever make money.
This is like the people who say that Cylindria went bankrupt and therefore we shouldn't build any more solar plants anymore.
I mean, it's all of them closed down, Robert. Every one of them closed down because they were unreliable and they were dangerous.
The IFR ran perfectly.
Hideously expensive.
The IFR ran perfectly for 30 years.
Let me tell you the real reason. Yeah, half of them operated okay, half of them.
Okay, well that's pretty good for an experimental thing. So let's. What's the problem with like moving forward?
Listen,
now, just hold on. No. Let me say something, please. Let me say something. Thank you. Can I say something? Okay. The IFR that is referred to in the film has been commercialized by General Electric. It's called the Prism reactor, and there's a lot of excitement in the United Kingdom right now to bring the first of one of these online, and it's got the support of Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. Why? Because Great Britain wants to get rid of their stockpile of weapons-grade plutonium, and this is a way to do it and generate electricity at the same time. It's a modular reactor. They've brought it down. It's about 350 megawatts. It's modular in design, and it's ready to go. Now, you know, why would you not move ahead with this? Why would you just say throw the baby out with the bathwater? No, I'm not asking you that question. I know what the answer is. We can't do it because it's nuclear, and nuclear is bad, and it's all a big hoax.
That again. You see what he's doing? He's mischaracterizing my argument, then arguing against it. I never said that.
I'm going to try to turn this to your questions in a minute.
Here's the problem. The additional problem, besides being 2 times as expensive and having a very, very bad reliability record, they are the technology that he explained at the end of this film, these new IFR technologies, which is a breeder reactor. It has the reprocessing facility inside and capability inside the reactor, which is a good thing if you're in the United States, because it does reprocess the plutonium and it makes the waste stream smaller. Here's the problem, is that breeder reactors create more plutonium than they can use. So at the end of the day, you know, that big football field just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and when it closes, and this is one of the deceptions in the film.
The opposite is
when it closes down, when that nuclear power plant closes down, then they've got to do something with it. And it's true that in France...
The precise opposite is true.
Well, that's not true. You saying that breeder reactors...
They recycle the fuel over and over and over again.
Right.
The fuel in an IFR, the fuel in an IFR never leaves the plant from the beginning of the plant life to the end of the plant life
until
the end. And what you end up with, that process is a small amount of nuclear waste that is highly radioactive for about 300 or 400 years. That's true.
Okay, and here's what the problem is with that. And what they should have told us in the film, but they didn't, is that the repositories that we build to store that nuclear waste, the size of those repositories is not dictated by the volume of the waste. It is dictated by the thermal profile. And that smaller amount is much, much, much hotter. So you have to build the repository the exact same size, because you have to put each bundle of waste far enough away from the other that they won't work together to generate a critical mass that will heat the rock and cause an accident. So it's not really changing anything in the long run. Your repository has to be the exact same size. But they point to it and say, oh, look, it's only a football field. that couldn't be harmful. But in fact, it can be very, very harmful because it's much more radioactive than the stuff you started out with.
We have
Right.
time for
Yeah.
a few audience questions.
Yeah, let's turn to the audience, and I will try to set up a post on .earth where we can get some of the factoids. It's sort of like those instant fact check things after debates, presidential debates. We'll see if we can work out some of that stuff. Okay, so audience question with a Q and short, and tell us who you are.
Overall, I think it's a good thing to see that film because it does restart the public discussion, and I think it's needed because we can't trust Congress to make decisions when there are disclosure not necessary anymore. Citizens United, everybody knows the contributions of energy industry is outrageous. So I think overall it's a good thing. However, I was here yesterday, and I don't know how many people were here yesterday. This outright dismissal of link between cancer and radioactivity, that you seem to spend so much time on that film with that gadget measuring the radioactivity, reminds me of the film yesterday about gasoline, when the argument of the industry, how they won those suits, or at least shut up the people who actually were suffering and had to abandon their homes, including $12 million mansion, that methane is a natural thing that is occurring in environment. That's what they are doing with methane, or methanin, whatever the gas name is. Okay. So it seems like you're kind of in that same line of defense here, that radioactivity is a natural occurrence. I happened to live in Moldova in 1991, 5 years passed after Chernobyl happened, and Moldova is was one of the Soviet Union republics, and at the time I was a journalist of a daily newspaper in the country, and came across a story that I had to work on. There were people who were resettled from 25-kilometer radius from Chernobyl, and they came to our newspaper as a last resort to demand help with housing. For 5 years, they were not provided housing still. Well, the problem in the next couple of years sort of sorted itself out because many of them died. I have a friend here from Kiev who at the time was pregnant, so 6, 7 months pregnant when it happened. Her husband was an engineer who was called on, a high-ranking engineer who was called on to help with the stabilizing the reaction. They managed to get their older son, at 11 years old son, out of the city. The city, with a metro area, more than a few million people lived in Kiev. For those who don't know, Kiev is about 100 kilometers away from Chernobyl, 60 miles in miles, and the city was cordoned off. People couldn't leave, even if they wanted to. Well, 15 years later, they immigrated to US. The woman is my friend. She had a miscarriage back then, a few months after the Chernobyl happened. She had cancer. She's a survivor, 5 years by now. Her husband had cancer, survivor by now. Her parents were not so lucky. They died here 15 years later. So I'm not sure that such an outright dismissal is, it makes me suspect how many other facts are stretched, including 38 countries have produced, have nuclear plants, and none had produced weapons. Well, India started as a nuclear plant, and they have weapons, and then Pakistan, and now, if it's such a safe thing to have a nuclear power reactor that doesn't lead to nuclear proliferation of weapons, then why we are trying to contain Iran so hard? All they're saying they are trying to get nuclear power.
These are all really powerful points.
Did you want to? Thank you. I don't feel the film doesn't do an outright dismissal that radiation does you absolutely no harm. It's just what I was trying to point out was that we are all bathed in radiation, and those variations in natural background radiation around the world are really extreme. Going from Times Square's 0.1 microsieverts into that beach in Brazil, which was 300 times that, and that's just in a naturally occurring variation. So when we see that there are increases in radiation as a result of a nuclear accident, of which there's been 2 that were significant, 3 if you count 3 Mile Island, but that was a very minor release. One has to put it into the context of what is the naturally occurring variation around the world. So absolutely, radiation will cause cancer, will cause miscarriages, all these things above a certain level. And in terms of Chernobyl, all I did is go by the best science that's available, which, despite what Bobby says, I have to believe the World Health Organization and a half a dozen other UN organizations have looked at this, and all they're doing is saying, they're not saying that nobody's gotten cancer, nobody's had miscarriages, nobody's had health problems, but statistically, when you do a large epidemiological study of the whole area, 600,000 people in that area, there is not an increase. There's not an increase. There's an increase in thyroid cancer among children, that's true, which is highly treatable, thank God. But there's not an increase in birth defects. There's not an increase, a large increase that they've been able to find in cancers, and that's from what it was before and in other similar areas that were unaffected. So that's a statistical thing, but so what happens, and this is part of the tragedy of Chernobyl and part of the tragedy of Fukushima, is that these tragedies happen, and then if you have a health problem, it's a natural matter to attribute it to this disaster that's happened. But the fact of the matter is, and people don't talk about this, 30% of us are going to get cancer in our lifetime, and 20% of us are going to die of it. So, but I certainly didn't mean to leave the impression that there's no connection at all at any level with radiation and cancer.
Next question.
Question over here. Let me just ask one question. Did you mean to leave the impression that there have been no cancer deaths from 3 Mile Island? Not a single one, which is what you said in the film?
I'm not saying anything. First of all, that's one thing. I am not a scientist. I'm not going around doing door-to-door epidemiological
But you
studies.
cherry-picked.
I'm not No, absolutely not.
You cherry-picked the so-called facts in
I'm
this
not.
film, and you're representing
I'm relying
this
on the American Cancer Society, the Centers for Disease Control, who've studied this stuff. I don't independently know this stuff. I go by the best peer-reviewed consensus science that's available, and I'm sure you can go on the internet and find outlier studies or anything. But this is exactly what climate deniers do.
Let me just say
they obscure they say the consensus science, the United Nations is lying, and that these outlier studies about climate change are actually true.
Let me say this.
So how do we know anything?
Let me just say this. That I guess the problem that I find infuriating about the film is that it presents itself as a neutral exploration.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. In fact, this film.
Can I finish this?
Yeah,
Andy?
finish the sentence, then I'll add something.
Okay. To me, it did. I don't know what the audience thinks. Whether it is not presented as kind of you're coming here to look at an industry broadside of the industry talking points, which, when I see it, these are identical to the industry talking points. And what I asked you, and let me just make this point. When I first saw this film, I said, get one person who has bona fide credentials, Tom Cochran at NRDC, or anybody, any real anti-nuclear activist, to come and interview them. There was none of those in this film.
On that point, I wanted to ask you about that, because
That's a fair point.
The Helen Caldicott stuff was kind of a setup in the sense that she was not prepared to sit down with you. I don't support her view of the data at all, but she was like, as Bobby said, I think there would be a couple of people I think could have been brought into the film. But now here's my point: how many here like Gasland, the film Gasland, or have we seen it? Was that a neutral film?
No, but it doesn't pretend to be.
How many people like The Cove? The Cove, which won an Oscar, about the horror of the Japanese killing of dolphins. Was that a neutral film?
They don't pretend to be. They're advocacy films.
How many think this film was neutral?
And this is an advocacy film, too, for the nuclear power industry, but you should tell people
But Josh Fox's film is an advocacy film against gas.
Yeah, it was. And he very, very clear about that from the beginning. He hates gas.
No, that's actually not very true when you would know.
He's an advocate. That's what he does. He goes around the country advocating against gas. He doesn't pretend to be a neutral observer.
Yeah.
And the same with The Cove.
Do you think?
But this is a pretense that this is somehow a neutral exploration.
How many of you think
this issue?
How many of you think the film was designed, portrays itself as a balanced, sort of neutral view of the stuff?
It's a different thing.
Yeah,
There's a difference
right.
between balance and neutrality, and I think much of the media today tries to find drama in stories by striking a balance. So they'll take two opposing views and put them together and create drama. What I chose to do, this is a very personal film to me, because I came out of the anti-nuclear mindset. I was never an activist. And I'm a passionate environmentalist, and I came out of this out of a concern about what we do about climate change. And it was Stuart Brand's book that really opened my eyes to this. I looked into it more, and I found there were a lot of other environmentalists who were having these same concerns, including Jim Hansen, who was very influential on me as well. So I made a film that reflects my own personal journey from being anti-nuclear to being pro-nuclear. The first third of the film really lays out the anti-nuclear case pretty well and is extremely critical of the nuclear power industry and how nuclear power is developed in this country. Extremely critical.
I missed that part of the film.
If we can fit in one more question or two, let's try to do that. We could even do them in sequence and then have a grand smackdown.
Hi. I'm a big believer in the environment, and my stepdad was actually a director at the Brookhaven Lab. And many years we had heated arguments, not quite as heated as yours, at home. And I invited him here tonight, and he couldn't make it. I thought that there was, you laid out very clearly, I think, the past nuclear information, which was beneficial for me. Usually he's a little heated, so his descriptions aren't as clear. But I think one of the things that Mr. Kennedy touched on is, if you look at nuclear as being the way to solve the global warming issue, I think what happens is, I guess my fear would be the direct route that then something like that to be fast-tracked. When he retired, he went on to consult for the Department of Energy, and they send teams of management through the country to the plants to consult and evaluate them for 2-week periods of time. And various people go in to evaluate, I guess, the physical aspects of the plant, and he was responsible for interviewing management. And you realize how many potential things can go wrong. And I know in your movie you touched on a recording saying how one guy turned this switch and it was the wrong thing, and one guy shut this off and it was the wrong thing. And I think it's great if there's a way to build a plant that's foolproof, that can't create the wrong scenario. But when you look at what happens if you take an industry that then isn't forced to monitor itself, is mostly people are doing things that are driven for a profit, and you then don't control them. I think the goal of controlling global warming will then get lost as you allow too many other things to happen while they develop nuclear energy, and that's potential for being
That's a great concern and a great question. The way, and I said this earlier, the way I think to think about this going forward, and the film was very critical about how nuclear power is developed in the United States, where you have these one-off plants, all the reactor rooms are different. If something goes wrong in one, it teaches you no lessons about fixing the other one, which is unlike what they did in France, where they standardized things. But I think going forward, what we need to think about is developing nuclear power plants like we develop a commercial aircraft, which is private enterprise, for profit, highly technological, complex machinery, whizzing millions of people every day in aluminum tubes at 30,000 feet at hundreds of miles an hour, and landing in all parts of the world in all kinds of weather, and it's remarkably safe. There was a thing in the New York Times a couple months ago, the commercial aviation is safer now than it's ever been. But that's a model where, you know, as we saw with the 777, the Dreamliner thing, where they had a problem with the battery recently, where they take out that battery, they fix that thing, and they replace it in all the other plants, all the other planes. And that's what the French have done, which has been remarkably safe. But that's a model for success. We can do economies of scale. You learn from when something goes wrong, and you can create a very, very safe system. And I think the airline manufacturing industry is a really good example of how we can make high technology, complex technological systems safe.
So what, another? Yeah.
Hi. Several years ago, there was a documentary that won an Oscar. It was called Chernobyl Heart. It was all about a specific birth defect of a heart valve where American surgeons had to go to the area around Chernobyl and perform all of these, try to rectify these things. So there's clearly a case that birth defects are a result of radiation exposure. There was small-scale studies done around nuclear plants. It's called the Tooth Fairy Project, where the baby teeth of children were collected who had been only in the area around plants. There were higher concentrations of strontium-90 in those baby teeth closer to nuclear plants. There's another study. There's another study that was. Is that incorrect?
I believe you're
wrote
talking
about that
about for
study
the
a number of
nuclear
years
weapons testing back in the 60s.
Can I just inject one thought here? If you do the same thing around coal-fired power plants, you would find the same impact. There's actually,
But that's
in
but
total,
that's
There's 100 times more radiation coming out of coal plants than at any nuclear plant.
If you think I'm standing here endorsing coal, you're very wrong.
No, I'm
and
not.
I think this is another false either-or situation.
Yeah, I agree.
Nuclear plants are unacceptable to me, and in terms of France, France has a State Secrets Act, so we hear very little about it. But there have been numerous shutdowns of large parts of France's nuclear fleet when there have been heat waves and the water that they use to cool the plants has gotten too hot, so they've had to take off their plants offline and import energy from Germany primarily, is my understanding. So there's also a couple of years ago, there was a report that a French reprocessing plant had a major leak. It went into a publicly used river. Those two rivers had to be closed to human activity temporarily. So the idea that France is operating this utopian nuclear industry, to me, is just fallacious.
Look, the fact of the matter is there are 440 nuclear plants operating around the world. In the 50-year history of nuclear power, there have been 3 major accidents identified in the film: 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and Chernobyl. Only at one of those has there been a loss of life due to radiation. And one can argue over what those numbers are, but that is, by any stretch, a remarkable safety record. No, hold on. There's no perfect. If you're going to wait for the Tooth Fairy to come along and provide the perfect, absolutely safe, magical solution to all energy problems, we'll be waiting forever. As you scale up wind, as you scale up solar, to the level where they can power an entire country, there'll be issues with those as well. People don't want the ridge lines covered. There's the problems with intermittency. There's problems with the access roads and the power lines. All of these things have issues that as you scale them up become more apparent. So what I'm saying is we need to pursue all of these options and make all of these technologies better and scalable and more affordable. But at the very moment when we're trying to combat climate change, which is an arithmetical certainty to cause tremendous societal catastrophe, perhaps, in this century, to reject this amazingly promising source of energy that doesn't produce CO2, to reject it and say, I don't want to develop it, I don't want to make it better, I don't want to research it, I don't want to do anything with it, to me, is a huge mistake. So I think we need more R&D, we need to make better nuclear power. We're never going to build an Indian Point again, we're never going to build a Fukushima again. These are old technologies from the 60s. But we don't also want to, right now, Governor Cuomo looks like he's probably going to approve hydrofracking in the state of New York. And his give back to the environmental movement is going to be to shut down nuclear Indian Point. That's not a victory to me. That's not a victory for anybody. We need to do, if we're going to get rid of gas and we're going to get rid of coal and get rid of oil, which we desperately need to do very quickly, we're not going to do it only with wind and solar. We're not going to do it. We need everything. And that's my point, and this is a conversation that we in the environmental movement need to have without ideology, without anger, without rancor, without saying, well, this is all a bunch of lies, and the World Health Organization is in cahoots with the nuclear industry, and you can't trust the CDC. And, you know, we're never going to get anywhere if we're fighting over these basic facts. And the reason I didn't go into a lengthy bit in the film about the future potential of nuclear power, and maybe I should make that film, is that we had to get past these initial stumbling blocks about safety and the amount of waste and all of these basic things, so we can start to have a rational conversation about a very promising technology that does not produce CO2.
Bobby wants to have fit in a word here too.
Okay, I'd say this. I'm all for doing some more research. So we have to bear in mind, however, that this industry has already received hundreds of billions of dollars of research money from US taxpayers, and much more from taxpayers around the world. If we put a tiny fraction of that into wind or solar, we could be operating our nation on that. And last summer, there were days when Germany powered the entire nation from solar energy within Germany. That is true. British Columbia this year has, on certain days, powered the entire province based upon renewable energy that they make themselves. They've still got a long way to go, but we can build this stuff much faster. It takes at least 10 or 20 years to build a coal plant or a nuke plant. We can build these solar and wind plants in a year or 2 years, and we've got 500 gigawatts to replace if we want to completely decarbonize America. And we can do that through solar and through wind, and we're doing it right now. The problem is we're not getting government support. If we got a tiny fraction of what they got, I want to say one thing about France. France is not this nuclear paradise, okay? What France has had to do to deal with its nuclear waste is they do process it, and they make the really hazardous stuff smaller. Then they take all the intermediate level nuclear waste and the low level nuclear waste, and they have a law that says they can characterize it as not being waste. And they off-gas it into the atmosphere, and they dump the tritium into the ocean, or they bury it in France. So, and we don't know, you know, the problem is you can say things like he said in the film, nobody's died from 3 Mile Island, and what he said just now, what you said just now, which is there's only been 3 accidents and you know, nobody gets killed. The problem is, it's just like the cigarette industry. You know, here's an industry that was killing 1 out of every 3 of its customers who used its product as directed for 60 years, and in 1997, the 7 heads of the 7 tobacco companies were able, they manufactured so much phony science, they were able to come before Congress, Congressman Waxman's committee, raise their right hand and swear under oath that they did not believe that cigarettes caused any health impacts to human beings. And the industry can do this because cancer is hidden. You know, it doesn't pop up and says 3 Mile Island did this to me. Now, in 1999, I went to visit a city that Fidel Castro has created in Cuba, because he's got a lot of doctors, and he's brought, it's called Little Chernobyl. And they bring over people who've been sick, children, and children with mutations, and children with leukemia, who got that, they believe, from Chernobyl. And he treats them there. So to say, you know, it's demonstrable, and, you know, we know about it, but you didn't see that in this film. This was not, you know, and that's what I object, Robert. I don't think it was balanced. I think you needed to have one guy in there, or one woman, who had credentials,
Bobby, what I will not do,
and knew
what
what
I
they
will
talked
not
about.
do as a journalist, as a documentary filmmaker, and as a historian, is put people in my film who are saying things that are demonstrably, scientifically provable untruths. I will not do that. And that's what you would be asking me to do. Now, you might disagree with me, but that is my responsibility as a documentary filmmaker is not for balance. My responsibility is for the truth.
I don't want balance either. I want
the truth.
And this was not truthful.
Well, well, that's a disagreement that we have.
Well,
that's a disagreement.
We're going to have to live with that one. Do we have time for any more questions?
One more question from you.
From me? Well, I guess the key thing here is there a way, would you see a way for this film to play a productive role in discourse going forward on our energy choices?
I mean, I'll go back to what I said from the beginning. I'm all for nuclear power if they can ever make it safe and get insurance. Let's have the industry go and say, let's get rid of the Price-Anderson Act so that we can be on a level playing field with wind and solar. And if they can make it economical, and you know, you can make energy by burning $100 bills. And that's what we're doing here. And then we can go and do research about whether we could break those down and do them with $20 bills. But it's still like so much more expensive by orders of magnitude than any other kind of energy that we're using that I just don't see that you can ever make it
Nuclear energy right now is, in the United States, the cheapest source of electricity. It's because it's installed.
Well, see,
it's true.
Well, existing
installed,
plants.
Existing
Yeah.
nuclear power,
Right.
even as crazy as the way they built that
Right.
plant out with all these cost overruns and everything. Today, that's why they're all the existing
it's not
the
more-
existing fleet of reactors are cash cows for the
It's
utilities.
not. Listen,
But
it's not.
it
It's
does
not
cost
cheaper
a lot
than
to
wind
make.
or solar.
I would have loved to
If-
have this discussion be about the economics and how we can make this affordable. That's the
That would've been
discussion we
good.
should have. We should have a discussion about how do we move forward,
then
how do we make this economical. That would be productive.
Well,
But
yeah.
by calling each other liars and hoaxes and bringing up things that are scientifically
Just trying to tell the
not
truth,
true.
Robert.
Well, it's the truth.
I think we got to
but-
take
but
this
it-
show on the road, huh?
It's the truth. Yeah.
I'm
we
serious.
should take it on the road. But you got to believe somebody, and I believe the peer-reviewed science of the established international institutions. I don't
Well-
know who else to believe. The same thing about climate change.
I hope you all feel
All right,
that
thank you.
there has been something learned tonight about the fissures and the agreement. Thank you for coming. And I will follow up on this on .earth in some way or other. Thank you, and thank you both. Another round of applause for these guys.